Hello everyone, welcome back to Exploring Prosperity. In this video I want to address the problem of gerrymandering. If you're like me and everybody I know, and almost 100% of the editorials published on this topic in the last couple of weeks, you'll share the same outrage and frustration about how political news just seems to be getting worse and worse. Politicians should not be picking their voters. Voters should be picking their politicians. I've just written an essay on my Substack called The Redistricting Debate No One's Having, Process versus Outcomes in American Democracy. And in this episode, I'm going to give you an overview of the main ideas. After reviewing studies and looking at the history of this, I realize that I'm angry at the outcome, but I'm not angry about the system, nor how bad the problems are that gerrymandering causes. I hope that this sparks your curiosity and you'll be interested in why, so you'll head over to the link in the description and read my full report. On Friday, the governor of Texas signed into law what Republican lawmakers in Texas, with a nudge from President Trump, pushed through mid-decade in congressional redistricting maps to flip Democratic seats and lock in a bigger GOP majority for the 2026 midterms. This sparked a chain reaction. California Democrats fired back with their own redrawn map designed to offset the 5 seats in Texas, and other states like New York, Illinois, Missouri, and others are talking about following suit. My friends were venting about this, saying it's just more proof of escalating polarization. It's a downward spiral, making things worse and worse. And they're not alone. Surveys show political polarization is a key driver of American pessimism about the next generation's prospects. But are we confusing a bad system with unfair outcomes? As Winston Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. Gerrymandering often feels unfair because it is. But the real question is whether the system behind it serves democratic principles and stays responsive to what the people want so that it can change over time. And this brings us to the heart of my essay, the gerrymandering paradox. The process that looks most threatening to democracy might actually show it's working as designed. The fact is that someone has to draw these district lines that decide who represent us in Congress. When that power sits with elected state legislatures on 2-year cycles, it's closest to the voters and quickest to adapt to changing opinions. The outrage over gerrymandering doesn't mean the system's broken as much as it prompts the system to begin to do its work. Nobody defends gerrymandering because it's not defensible, but nobody's defending the responsive local electorate system that fixes it either. Ironically, because it's the same system that creates it. That's the gap my essay fills, exploring the history, addressing the criticisms, and arguing that imperfect democratic processes have served the people's will over the long term, and gerrymandering likely strengthens that rather than weakens it. Here are the major criticisms that people write about and talk about and think about when it comes to gerrymandering. These are the backbone of reform pushes everywhere, and reforms have actually occurred frequently. First, the biggest problem, gerrymandered seats that become more secure breed extremism. If a district is locked for one party, extreme candidates can prevail and pander to their base, turning Congress into a battlefield of ideologues instead of problem solvers. The second criticism, politicians choosing voters flips democracy on its head. Voters should pick reps, not the other way around. Legislators drawing their own maps in self-serving and unfair manipulation is wrong. Third, modern technology makes it worse. Big data and algorithms allow them to carve districts with surgical precision, way beyond old school tricks, potentially locking in power forever. The fourth criticism, it kills faith in democracy. If people think voters don't count because it's rigged, they tune out, creating a cynical spiral that undermines everything. And fifth, independent commissions fix this all. Take the politicians out, put in neutral experts, and you get fairer maps that actually reflect voters. This is compelling and bipartisan. But when I looked deeper through the lens of long-term responsiveness, a more nuanced picture emerged. One where even in one-party strongholds, backlash can build slowly but surely. Let's go back and look at history for context. The Constitution itself doesn't require districts. The 13 original states used at-large elections, except for Virginia, which even manipulated the lines in 1788 in a failed attempt to block James Madison from being the first elected member to the House. The term gerrymander itself came from 1812 in Massachusetts, but the tactics were old news. Over time, states shifted to single-member districts via laws, not mandates. Someone has to make these districts, so the question is, who is that going to be, and how do we keep them accountable to the will of the people? All 50 states started with legislatures drawing lines. Now, only 30 still do, because the 20 others face successful challenges through the ballot box that switch to commissions or other alternatives. Every change came democratically. Voter initiatives in places like California and Michigan, referenda in Ohio, public-backed laws in Iowa. This show is being brought to you by our sponsor, Trueflation. Professional investors and economists and probably any casual observers know that government inflation statistics are only an approximation of what real inflation is. Not only that, but the government has a conflict of interest because high inflation can be so damaging to the economy, the deficit, and our $36 trillion in debt. Trueflation collects over 80 million pricing data points. Most are updated daily to reveal inflation with precision for asset managers, governments, companies, and the general public. Check them out at trueflation.com. In no cases were changes imposed by courts based on any appeal for fairness. All successful redistricting court cases were to resolve legal issues like racial bias or unequal populations. This is important because democratic buy-in gives legitimacy, even if results appear contrived and unfair. Important because courts can be isolated from political accountability. Voters can boot lawmakers every 2 years if they hate the maps enough, and it turns out that when redistricting becomes too extreme, the electorate does remove authority from legislatures in a way that retains that right to switch back if the electorate were to object. It's also interesting to see that several attempts to do just that have all failed. In those 20 states that have forced a change in redistricting processes, there are a variety of methods, all including commissions, that have different means of selecting the commissioners, different ways to be appealed and validated, and each reflects different priorities of each state's electorate. It looks to me like when politicians choose voters through gerrymandering, when the public views it as abuse, then things do change. It may take time, but history shows it does happen. Now let's talk about the criticisms and how well they hold up as being real. It seems obvious that carved out contrived districts should accentuate extremism. But research shows it only explains 10 to 20% of political polarization since the 1970s. The other 80 to 90% of the contributing factors comes from natural demographic sorting and media fragmentation. A 2023 Harvard analysis confirms gerrymandering cuts competition, maybe boosting extremes, but it's secondary to voter-driven divides. Liberals dominate cities, conservatives dominate rural areas. Another study shows Senate polarization is at the same extremes as the House, but senators can't be gerrymandered, they run statewide. The big point is that polarization likely mirrors real preferences. And finally, it's worth considering that if anti-gerrymandering efforts were to actually lead to more moderate representatives, that might conceal real voter differences that actually reduce accountability. The third complaint is technological advancement, and yes, it does amp up precision. But that technology has also yielded tools that detect bias more effectively and much faster, making it easier to call out and organize against. The fourth issue that gerrymandering reduces trust in government seems obviously to be true. But actually, this should only undermine the system if it leads to despondency and withdrawal from democratic participation. But the evidence shows the opposite. When it's deemed unfair enough, voters become motivated, not despondent, and the core check remains: elections every 2 years. In 2018, Missouri voted 62% for changes, only to reject most of those resultant changes 2 years later by 51%. In Utah, voters approved establishing an independent commission that legislators tried to overturn, but failed to when the Utah Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the move violated the intentions of the voters. The bottom line is that no state system has escaped accountability. So why don't we see what happens in states like Texas and California in the next election cycles to see whether there's enough political outrage to change the redistricting methodology going forward. With the Texas redistricting, for instance, polls show GOP support at about 60%, but Democrats opposing it over 80% and independents opposing it 51%. And the fifth criticism, that independent commissions are a better solution, doesn't actually stand up to scrutiny. We're proud to be sponsored by Foundation. They've created Passport, one of the top-rated Bitcoin hardware wallets, proudly made in the USA. It's fully open source and air-gapped, meaning your Bitcoin stays completely offline and secure. The shocking Bybit exchange hack shows why holding some Bitcoin offline diversifies risk. Now they're launching Passport Prime, your all-in-one solution for not only Bitcoin, but all passwords and 2FA security. Head to foundation.xyz to secure your digital future. And the fifth criticism, that independent commissions are a better solution, doesn't actually stand up to scrutiny. Many, if not most, redistricting maps are challenged and approved only after revision and are frequently criticized by both parties. Perhaps the biggest problems with commission-based mapping is accountability. Citizens who disapprove have more limited and less timely recourse than the 2-year election cycle. But the electorate has never reversed itself and restored redistricting authority back to the legislature, though there have been many attempts to do so. Today, other political election problems like money in politics, term limits, electoral college, and political polarization are all real, but our system does allow for and does create solutions when the problems get big enough. Gerrymandering is not a death knell, but a test of resilience. An outrage is the trigger for change and should be welcomed. Our judicial system has been a huge boost to this process as well, sticking to law rather than fairness. For instance, the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously in 2015 that the term legislature in the U.S. Constitution includes people acting via direct voter initiatives that has removed redistricting power from the state. And in 2019, the Supreme Court ruled in Rucho versus Common Cause that partisan gerrymandering isn't for judges. It's political and best left to local democratic fixes. You can find my essay in the link below or by Googling Bob Dewey Substack. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, take care.